"Pretend to be my wife," he said, and the world tilted on its axis. If you want to know how a lie that big, spoken by a man with eyes as hard and gray as storm clouds over the plains, can turn into the only truth that matters, then stay with me. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things you do, because I promise you, the ending is worth the wait. It all started with my father's debt. Not a small debt for flour or seed, but a chasm, a dark pit dug by a man named Bartholomew Sterling, who collected debts the way a vulture collects bones. We were going to lose everything. Our small laundry business, the tiny room we called home, the fragile peace we had carved out for ourselves in a town that barely tolerated our existence. That was the day Jasper Thorne walked into our lives. He didn't knock. The door to our laundry, thick with the scent of soap and steam, simply opened, and he filled the frame. He was a legend, a whisper. A gunslinger, they said, but he owned the largest ranch in the territory, the one with the black stoned fortress of a house on the hill that looked down on us all. He moved with a stillness that was more frightening than any sudden motion. His gaze swept the room, over the baskets of linen and my father's weary face, and then it landed on me. I was 18, and I felt ancient. In my simple white prairie dress, the one I kept for Sundays that never came, I must have looked like a ghost against the billowing steam. "I have a proposition," Jasper Thorne said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He looked at my father, but his words were for me. "Mr. Sterling holds your marker. I will purchase it. I will see it, and all future debts cleared. I will provide for your father for the rest of his days." My father, a man shrunken by worry, could only stare. What do you want in return?" he rasped. Jasper Thorne's eyes, a startling pale gray, returned to me. "Her. I want your daughter." A cold dread, colder than any winter wind, washed over me. I braced myself for the expected, the vile proposition of a powerful man. But what he said next was worse because it was so utterly mad. "I want her to pretend to be my wife." My father began to protest, a weak, fluttering sound that Jasper Thorne silenced with a single raised hand. He never took his eyes off me, and I felt pinned by his intensity, like a butterfly under glass. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more," he stated, the words clipped and precise. "You will live in my home. You will be afforded every comfort. You will wear the clothes I provide and the ring I give you. In public, you will be Mrs. Thorne. In private, you will be an employee, compensated for your time. The arrangement will last for 6 months. At the end of that period, the debt is settled permanently, and you will be given a sum sufficient to start a new life elsewhere. Do you understand the terms?" I looked at my father, his face ashen, his hope warring with his terror for me. I saw the cramped room we lived in, felt the constant gnawing hunger, the humiliation of bowing and scraping before people who despised us. Then I looked back at the gunslinger, this powerful, lonely man who was offering a cage, yes, but a gilded one. It was a choice between 2 prisons. I chose the one with a future at the end of it. "I understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it was enough. He gave a short, decisive nod. "Pack a bag. With only what you need. Everything else will be provided." And so I left the world of steam and lie, of rough-spun cotton and mended seams, and walked out into the blinding summer sun behind a man who had just bought me, body and soul, for the price of a lie. His house wasn't a house. It was a declaration of power, built of dark river stone and thick glass. It loomed over the valley, beautiful and forbidding. As we approached, I felt my courage shrivel. The simple white dress I wore felt like a costume for a girl who had died an hour ago. This was my new life. a lie I had to live, a role I had to play, and the only rule was to pretend. The inside of the house was just as intimidating as the outside. It was vast and silent, filled with dark, heavy furniture that seemed to absorb the light. Polished wood gleamed underfoot, and the air smelled of leather and beeswax, a clean, masculine scent that was all him. A woman, older and stout, with kind eyes and hair the color of spun silver, met us at the door. "Martha, this is Leanne," Jasper said, his tone flat, devoid of any warmth. "She will be staying with us. She is to be treated as the lady of the house." The woman, Martha, looked from Jasper's stony face to my pale one. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, pity perhaps, or just plain curiosity. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Welcome, miss," she said softly. Jasper turned to me, his presence filling the grand entryway. "Martha is my housekeeper. She runs the household. You will want for nothing. Your rooms are prepared." He spoke as if reciting an inventory. He led me up a wide, curving staircase, our footsteps echoing in the silence. My room, or rather my suite of rooms, was larger than our entire laundry. There was a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in cream-colored lace, a sitting room with a small fireplace, and a dressing room where closets stood open, already filled with beautiful dresses and silks and velvets. On the vanity table lay a velvet box. Jasper gestured towards it. "Open it." My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a ring. It was a simple band of gold, but it held a diamond that caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "This will be your wedding ring," he said. It was my mother's. The statement hung in the air between us, a strange and unexpected piece of his history, offered without emotion. He then laid out the rest of the rules. I was not to enter his study or his bedroom. I was to direct any household requests through Martha. I was to be ready to attend social functions on his arm. "Your primary duty," he finished, his gray eyes locking onto mine, "is to be convincing. People will be watching. My rivals, my associates. They must believe this is a genuine marriage. Can you do that?" I thought of my father, safe for the first time in years. I thought of the crushing weight of debt being lifted. I could do anything. "Yes," I said. "Good," he replied, turning to leave. At the door he paused. "There is a dinner party tomorrow night. A test. Do not fail it." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the opulent, silent room with a dead woman's ring and the lie that weighed more than gold. The next evening the house was transformed. The silence was replaced by the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Lanterns cast a warm glow across the polished floors, and the air, now scented with perfume and roasted meat, felt thick with expectation. I stood at the top of the stairs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Martha had helped me dress in a gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered when I moved. My hair was swept up in a way I'd never worn it, and my mother-in-law's ring felt heavy and foreign on my finger. I felt like an actress on her opening night, terrified I would forget my lines. When I descended the stairs, Jasper was waiting at the bottom. He was dressed in a severe black suit that made him look even taller and more formidable. For a single breathtaking moment, his cold expression wavered. His eyes swept over me, and I saw a flicker of something. Surprise? Admiration? Before the mask slammed back into place. "You look acceptable," he grunted, offering his arm. His touch was like a spark on my bare skin. As we entered the dining room, a dozen pairs of eyes turned towards us. The conversations faltered. I felt their gazes like tiny needles, probing, judging. I kept my head high, just as Jasper had instructed. "Smile," he murmured, his voice so low only I could hear it. "You are a happy bride." Then I saw her. A woman seated to Jasper's right, with fiery red hair and a dress that seemed to be made more of jewels than fabric. Her smile was sharp, her eyes predatory. This, I knew instinctively, was the test. "Jasper, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You didn't tell us you had returned with a souvenir." Her eyes raked over me, dismissing my silk gown and landing on my face, my features that marked me as an outsider. This was Isabella Vance, a name I'd heard whispered in town, the daughter of a wealthy banker who had long been trying to merge her family's interests with Jasper's. "Isabella," Jasper said, his voice level, "allow me to introduce my wife, Leanne Thorne." The word wife sounded strange and loud in the suddenly quiet room. Isabella's smile tightened. "How charming. And where did you find her, Jasper? I wasn't aware the mail order catalogs had become so exotic." The insult was a slap, and heat flooded my face. But before I could shrink, I remembered my father. I remembered the purpose of this charade. I met her gaze and gave her a small, serene smile. "My husband is a man of impeccable and surprising taste," I replied, my voice calm. "I find it's one of his most admirable qualities." A ripple went through the table. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the corner of Jasper's mouth twitch. The test had begun. The rest of the dinner was a minefield. Isabella and her allies at the table sent volley after volley of thinly veiled questions, each one designed to trip me up, to expose my humble origins. They asked about my family in San Francisco, a fiction Jasper had concocted. They asked about the finishing schools I had supposedly attended, the society balls I had never seen. With each question, I felt the ice beneath my feet thinning. I drew on my observations from the laundry, where I had listened to the gossip of wealthy women for years. I spoke of fabrics, of social rivalries I had only heard about, weaving a tapestry of half-truths and plausible lies. Jasper remained largely silent, a thunderous presence at the head of the table, but I felt his support in small ways. When a man asked a particularly pointed question about my dowry, Jasper cut in smoothly. "My wife's value is not something to be discussed over dinner, Samuel." When Isabella commented on my delicate appetite, he placed a piece of bread on my plate and said, "My wife eats as she pleases." They were small gestures, but to me, they were lifelines. By the time the guests began to depart, I was emotionally exhausted. Isabella was the last to leave. She cornered me near the grand entryway while Jasper was seeing another guest out. "You're clever," she hissed, her beautiful face contorted with malice. "But you're not one of us. This house, his name, his fortune, they were meant for me. He will grow tired of his little novelty, and when he does, I will be here to pick up the pieces. All of them." She brushed past me, her expensive perfume leaving a cloying trail. I stood there, trembling slightly, the facade of the serene Mrs. Thorne crumbling. The front door closed, and the house was once again plunged into silence. Jasper walked back into the hall, his face unreadable. He stopped a few feet from me. The air crackled with unspoken things. I expected a critique, a list of my mistakes. Instead, he just looked at me for a long moment. "You did well," he said, the words sounding almost rusty, as if he rarely used them. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face, but his hand stopped, hovering in the air between us before dropping back to his side. "Get some rest," he said, his voice gruff again. "The performance is over for tonight." He turned and walked towards his study, the sound of his footsteps a lonely rhythm in the cavernous hall. I was left alone, my heart still pounding, a strange warmth spreading through my chest at his simple, unexpected praise. A crack had appeared in his armor, and for the first time, I wondered about the man hiding inside. In the days that followed, a quiet routine settled over the stone fortress. I would take my meals, sometimes alone, sometimes with Jasper, in tense, formal silence. I would walk the grounds, a lonely figure in a beautiful dress, feeling the eyes of the ranch hands on me. They kept their distance, whispering about the boss's strange, new, foreign wife. The only person who spoke to me with any real warmth was Martha. She would find me in the library, where I spent hours poring over books I'd only ever dreamed of reading, and bring me tea. She never asked about my arrangement with Jasper, but her knowing eyes saw everything. One afternoon, she found me staring out the window at Jasper as he broke a new wild stallion in the corral. He moved with a raw, focused grace, a stark contrast to the stiff, formidable man at the dinner table. "He has a way with broken things," Martha said, her voice soft beside me. I jumped, not having heard her approach. "He seems angry," I replied, watching as he gentled the frightened animal with a firm hand and a low voice. "He's not angry, child," she said, her gaze also on the man in the corral. "He's wounded. A long time ago he trusted someone, a business partner, a man he thought of as a brother. That man betrayed him, tried to ruin him, and used someone Jasper cared for to do it. He lost nearly everything. He built this house, this fortune, back up with his own 2 hands, but he built walls around his heart at the same time." She looked at me then, her gaze direct. "He needed a wife to secure his assets from vultures like Isabella Vance and her father, who were circling again, trying to force his hand in a merger. A wife makes his position legally unassailable. A fake wife, he thought, was safer. No emotions, no attachments, no chance of being betrayed again." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The coldness, the rules, the constant vigilance. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about self-preservation. "He thinks love is a weakness," Martha finished sadly, "a vulnerability he can't afford." That evening, when Jasper came in for dinner, smelling of horse and sweat and leather, I saw him differently. I saw the lonely boy beneath the dangerous man. He barely looked at me as he sat down. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice sharp, noticing my stare. "No," I said softly. "I was just wondering if the stallion is all right." His head snapped up, his gray eyes surprised. He had expected a question about dresses or social calls, not about his work. A long moment passed. "He'll be fine," he said, his voice a fraction softer. "He just needed to know who was in charge." I nodded, my heart aching with a strange new emotion. I was beginning to realize that the same could be said for the man sitting across from me. My new understanding of Jasper's motivations didn't make my position any less precarious. In fact, it made it worse. I was no longer just an actress playing a part for money. I was becoming entangled in the real-life drama of this man's life. I learned from a stray comment Martha made that the man my father was indebted to, Bartholomew Sterling, was a close associate of Isabella Vance's father. They were a pack of wolves, and Jasper was the prize they were trying to bring down. The fake marriage was his shield, a brilliant, cold-blooded strategy to protect his empire, and I was the centerpiece of that strategy. The knowledge was a heavy weight. I started paying more attention, listening more closely. One night, unable to sleep, I crept out of my room, drawn by a sliver of light from under Jasper's study door. I knew I was breaking one of his cardinal rules, but I couldn't help myself. I pressed my ear to the thick wood. His voice was low and strained, laced with a weariness that cut through me. "They're making their move," he was saying. "Sterling is calling in all his markers, trying to create a panic. Vance is using it as leverage, demanding a controlling interest in the mining operation." There was another voice, older, calmer, his lawyer, I presumed. "The marriage buys us time, Jasper. As long as your assets are tied to a marital estate, they can't force a dissolution without a lengthy and complicated court battle. They're hoping you'll buckle before then." "And if I don't?" Jasper's voice was grim. "They will come after her," the lawyer said. "They will try to prove the marriage is a sham. They will dig into her past. They will use her to break you." A long, heavy silence followed. I held my breath, my hand pressed to my mouth. "She's stronger than they think," Jasper said finally, and the quiet conviction in his voice sent a jolt through me. "But she shouldn't have to be. This was a mistake." "It was your only move, Jasper." "Was it?" he asked, and the raw pain in that single question was devastating. I scurried back to my room, my heart pounding. He was protecting me. He was worried about me. The man who had bought me like a piece of livestock was now afraid for my safety. The lie had become a cage for him, too, and I, the little souvenir Isabella had mocked, was suddenly the most important piece on the board, the fulcrum upon which his entire world was balanced. The thought was terrifying, and in a secret, treacherous part of my heart, it was thrilling. The pressure continued to build, a palpable tension that filled the stone house like a gathering storm. Jasper grew more withdrawn, his face a mask of grim concentration. There were long nights when I would see the light in his study burning until dawn. Isabella Vance and Bartholomew Sterling were tightening the noose. A shipment of essential mining equipment was mysteriously lost. Key ranch hands were lured away with promises of higher pay. Every move was calculated to destabilize Jasper's operations and force him into a ruinous deal. One evening he came home late, his suit splattered with mud, his face as dark as a thunderhead. He didn't speak, just stalked into the dining room and poured himself a whiskey, downing it in one go. I was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in one of my simpler day dresses, a task that reminded me of my old life. "What happened?" I asked softly. "Nothing that concerns you," he bit out, his back to me. The harshness of his tone was a physical blow. "It does concern me," I shot back, rising to my feet, the mending forgotten. "Everything that happens in this house, everything that happens to you, concerns me. Or have you forgotten? I'm your wife." The word hung in the air, charged and dangerous. He whirled around, his gray eyes blazing. "You are my employee. You are here to play a part you are clearly forgetting. You know nothing of my business, nothing of the risks, nothing of the men I am dealing with." "I know they are trying to destroy you," I cried, taking a step closer. "I know they will use anyone and anything to do it, including me. Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I'm a doll to be dressed up and sat in a corner? I am living this lie with you, Jasper. The least you can do is trust me." "Trust you," he scoffed, the sound bitter and cruel. "I don't trust anyone. That was the first lesson I ever learned, and I learned it the hard way. You should try to remember that." His words were designed to wound, to push me away, to put me back in the box he had created for me. But I saw the fear behind his anger, the raw terror of a man who felt the walls closing in. I didn't back down. I stood my ground, my own anger and frustration boiling over. "You hide in this fortress, Jasper, with your money and your rules, and you think it makes you strong," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "But you're just a coward. You're afraid to let anyone in. You're afraid to feel anything." It was too much. I had gone too far. His face went white. In 2 long strides he closed the distance between us. He grabbed my upper arms, his grip firm but not painful. I thought he was going to shake me, to yell at me. but instead his gaze dropped to my mouth. The anger in his eyes warred with something else, something hotter and more desperate. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure which one of us I was pleading with. But it was too late. He lowered his head and his mouth crashed down on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a storm, a release of all the tension, all the fear, all the unspoken things that had been simmering between us for weeks. It was desperate and raw, and it broke his only rule. And in that moment, the entire world fell away, leaving only the shocking, undeniable truth of his lips on mine. The kiss ended as abruptly as it began. He pulled back as if burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Shock radiated through me, my lips tingling, my mind reeling. We stood there in the silent room, the space between us charged with a new, terrifying electricity. The lie of our arrangement had been shattered, and we were left standing in the wreckage, with no script to follow. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a dawning, terrible realization. "Leanne," he started, his voice hoarse, but he couldn't seem to find any other words. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away from me and pacing to the window, staring out into the darkness as if the night held answers. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling suddenly cold and exposed. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound and aching confusion. That kiss hadn't felt like an act of rage. It had felt like a confession. For days he avoided me. The house, which had once felt vast and lonely, now felt suffocatingly small. We were like two celestial bodies trapped in the same orbit, close enough to feel the pull, but never touching. Meals were silent, agonizing affairs. If our paths crossed in the hallway, he would give a stiff nod and quickly move past, his jaw tight. The silence was louder than any argument. Finally, I couldn't bear it any more. One night, I saw the light on in his study again. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door and knocked. There was a long pause. "Come in," he said, his voice weary. He was sitting behind his massive desk, papers spread before him, but he wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the unlit fireplace. He looked up as I entered, his face etched with exhaustion. "We can't go on like this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I know," he sighed, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. I sat, the rich leather cool against my skin. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, and buried his face in his hands. "I broke the terms of our agreement," he said, his voice muffled. "I apologize." "It wasn't an apology kiss, Jasper." He looked up, and for the first time, the walls were down. The gunslinger, the tycoon, the master of the fortress, they were all gone. In their place was just a man, haunted and desperately lonely. "No," he admitted, his voice cracking. "It wasn't." He finally told me everything. He told me about the friend who had betrayed him, who had not only stolen his money, but had also seduced the woman Jasper had thought he loved, revealing the hollowness of their relationship. "She was with me for the money, the status," he said, his voice raw. "When the money was gone, so was she. The experience taught me that love is a transaction, a weakness to be exploited. So I built this, an empire no one could touch. And I made a rule: never mix business with emotion. Never trust anyone completely." He looked at me, his gray eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Then you walked into my life. It was supposed to be a simple transaction, a shield. But you weren't simple. You were quiet and strong, and you saw things no one else did. You saw me, and it terrified me." He stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of my chair. The arrangement is over, Leanne. Sterling and Vance are making their final push tomorrow. It's too dangerous for you. I'll have Martha pack your things. The money, everything I promised, it's yours. You can go." He was letting me go. He was pushing me away to protect me. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't leave. "No," I said, looking up at him from the chair. My voice was steady, infused with a certainty that surprised even me. "I'm not leaving." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Leanne, you don't understand. Tomorrow, Sterling and his banker cronies are meeting me here. They believe they have me cornered. They're going to present a final offer that amounts to theft. When I refuse, they will get unpleasant. They will use you. They will try to publicly discredit you, to prove our marriage is a fraud, to invalidate my legal position." "Then let them try," I said, standing up to face him. We were so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You hired me to be your wife, Jasper. Let me do my job." A flicker of hope, fragile and tentative, sparked in his exhausted eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked. And so, in the quiet of his study, with the fate of his empire hanging in the balance, I told him my plan. It wasn't a plan born of financial genius or legal cunning. It was a plan born from years of listening in a laundry, of understanding the petty vanities and hidden insecurities of the wealthy. It was a plan built on the knowledge that men like Bartholomew Sterling and Isabella's father were driven by greed, but also by ego. The next day they arrived. Bartholomew Sterling, a man whose face was a road map of avarice, and Mr. Vance, whose smug condescension was a perfect match for his daughters. They strode into Jasper's study like conquering heroes. I was seated by the fireplace, demure and silent, in a simple blue dress. They barely glanced at me. They laid out their terms, a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. Jasper listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He refused, just as they knew he would. "A foolish choice, Thorne," Sterling sneered. "We have the votes, the leverage. Your position is untenable. And," he added, turning his venomous gaze on me, "we have cause to believe this hasty marriage of yours is a complete fabrication, a desperate and fraudulent attempt to shield your assets. A word from me to the right people, and this little dalliance will be investigated and annulled. You will be ruined. And she," he said, gesturing at me with a dismissive flick of his wrist, "will be disgraced." This was my cue. I stood up. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice soft. Both men turned, surprised I had spoken. "I've heard so much about you. My father spoke of you often." Sterling looked confused. "Your father?" "Yes, the owner of the town's Chinese laundry," I said clearly. "He told me how you would come to him, how you would complain that the starch in your collars was never quite right, no matter how many times he redid them for free. He said you were a man who always looked for a way to get something for nothing." A flush crept up Sterling's thick neck. Vance shot him a look of distaste. "Jasper," I continued, turning to my husband, my fake husband, my everything, "these men don't want a partnership. They want a prize. They see what you've built, and they want to own it. But they don't understand what it's made of. They think it's made of money and power." I walked over to Jasper and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. His hand was warm and strong. "But I know what it's made of. It's made of this man's sweat and sleepless nights, and a promise he made to himself a long time ago. And you cannot buy that. You cannot steal it, and you cannot break it." I turned back to the two stunned men. So take your offer and your threats and leave this house. My husband has work to do." For a moment there was only silence. Then Jasper squeezed my hand, a silent message of solidarity, of victory. The two men, their bluff called, their egos bruised, sputtered for a moment before gathering their papers and storming out, utterly defeated, not by legal arguments or threats of violence, but by the simple, unshakable truth of a united front. When the heavy front door slammed shut, the silence that descended upon the house was different. It wasn't the lonely, empty silence of before. It was a peaceful, settled silence. Jasper stood looking at the door for a long moment. Then he turned to me. The mask was gone. All the walls were gone. His gray eyes, which I had once thought so cold, were shining with an emotion I now recognized as wonder. "How did you know that would work?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "I didn't," I confessed. "I only knew that their weakness was their pride, and my strength was you." He closed the distance between us in a single step. He gently cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones. "The contract is fulfilled," he said softly. "The debt is paid. Your father is safe. I will have the final payment drawn up for you in the morning. A bonus for services rendered." The words were a test. He was offering me the transaction, the business arrangement, one last time. He was giving me the out he thought I deserved. I looked into his eyes, into the heart of the man I had come to know, the man I had fallen in love with. I shook my head slowly. "I don't want the money, Jasper." A slow, breathtaking smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features into something beautiful. "Then what do you want, Leanne?" he whispered. My heart was in my throat. This was the final truth, the one that mattered more than any lie we had ever told. "I want the man who needed a fake wife because he was too afraid to find a real one," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I want the man who gentles broken horses and builds fortresses to protect a wounded heart. I want the man who looked at a poor girl from a laundry and saw someone strong." His smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound, reverent sincerity. "The arrangement is over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the simple gold band he had given me, the one I had left on my vanity that morning, thinking my part was over. He took my left hand in his. "Leanne," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, "pretend to be my wife." My breath hitched. The same words he had spoken all those weeks ago, but this time they were not a command. They were a question, a plea, a promise. I felt tears well in my eyes, tears of joy, of relief, of a love I never thought possible. I gave him the answer that had been growing in my heart since the first time I saw the loneliness in his eyes. "No," I said softly. He flinched, his face falling. I reached up and touched his cheek. "I won't pretend any more." And as he slid his mother's ring onto my finger, for real this time, I knew I was finally home.